remembering Congressman Doug LaMalfa. The Republican and fourth-generation rice farmer died at the age of 65. Since 2012, he has represented rural California in District 1 and the northernmost part of the state.
The Butte County Sheriff's Office says LaMalfa was rushed to the hospital last night after a medical emergency. He went into surgery and died. The coroner will determine the cause of death.
His Republican district was set to turn blue after Californians approved Prop 50 in November. But in this era of deeply divided politics, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are uniting this afternoon, remembering him as deeply committed and a fierce champion for rural California.
KCRA 3's Michelle Bandura joins us live from Yuba City at his district office with how his constituents are remembering him today. Michelle.
Well, Lisa, people have been stopping by Congressman LaMalfa's district office here all day, wanting to offer condolences and to share stories about the man who's represented them literally for more than 2 decades. They say he's really someone who understands them and someone they believe is approachable and that they could relate to, talking about how much they will miss him. Now, one woman who arrived here at the office earlier today, she had balloons and a card and flowers wanting to pay tribute to her congressman. She was in tears talking with us about how much he did for the rural farming communities as well as victims of wildfires. And all over Sutter County, we saw flags lowered to half staff, like at the county administration building. They tell us they are stunned over his sudden passing and sad, saying there's no one else like him who would look after them and truly represent Northern California in Washington. We also talked with LaMalfa's chief of staff, who started working for him 2 weeks into his first term as a member of the California Assembly in 2002.
He always viewed his job as, and it was really empowering. And I think if you talk to any of our staff, he put a absolute point that the job was to solve the problem, and the bureaucratic red tape didn't matter. Your job was to get around that for people.
It wasn't, call my staff. It was Doug himself who was available to do that. And he was just the guy that would show up. He was the guy that would deliver for the constituents here. And he's going to be very missed by this whole community.
He's a farmer. A lot of us are farmers here. So he understood the value, what we went through.
Yeah, from voters like that woman to his chief of staff to elected officials, they all really shared stories about how approachable he was and how they could really relate to him, and how they would tell stories about how he would just show up at local events, the joke being that, you're having a backyard barbecue, he's going to be there whether he got an invitation or not. Again, everyone just really going to miss him. His chief of staff also telling me that their office held more town hall meetings since 2020 than any other member of the California Congress combined. And so that's what he wanted to do, was get out and talk to the people. Reporting live in Yuba City, Michelle Bandura, KCRA 3 News.
Michelle, his district geographically, it was huge in Northern California, but recently he was focused on the cleanup there at the Hotel Marysville, right?
Yeah, that's right. He's known for going to all the small towns, really covering his district. And just recently, he had been talking with the folks in Marysville because, if you remember, a fire ravaged that hotel, and he had earmarked $3 million in federal funds for that cleanup because the small town of Marysville, it's a budget they just couldn't afford to do that.
All right, Michelle, thank you. Well, over at the state capitol, lawmakers are mourning LaMalfa.
Our KCRA 3 political director, Ashley Zavala, joins us with how people are remembering their last conversations with him.
Yeah, and actually, before I get into sort of the harder news here, one thing that I will mention is that Doug LaMalfa also just became a grandfather, which is part of those conversations for the very first time recently. But LaMalfa served at our state capitol as an assemblyman and state senator from 2002 to 2012. This is all before he went to Congress. In that role, LaMalfa influenced and became close with some of the Republicans serving as California state lawmakers today. One of them is current state senator Tony Strickland, who was actually his roommate back in the early 2000s. LaMalfa officiated Strickland's wedding, as you can see in these photos the senator shared with us today. Strickland said LaMalfa cared so much about his district and rural California. Strickland told me they spoke within the last couple of weeks about how LaMalfa was planning to fight to continue representing his district, even though he was the target of California's new gerrymandered maps under Proposition 50. Democrats redrew U.S. House maps and filled his district with more Democratic-leaning voters to try to unseat him. Here's what Strickland had to say about that conversation.
I talked to him about a week and a half ago, and he said even though the uphill battle, he was going to fight for his constituents in rural California. He was going to run in the newly drafted district that put him all the way down to Marin County. And I talked to him just, not too long ago, and I told him that I would do everything I could to help him with his race. But he was committed. He was ready to take on that fight and run. I'm still shocked and in disbelief. I'm going to miss him. I can't believe he's gone. But the thing is about Doug is, as great of a legislator as he was even a better person.
LaMalfa's upcoming political opponent, or who was supposed to be former state Senate pro tem, a Democrat, Mike McGuire, he was planning to unseat LaMalfa under the newly drawn district maps with Proposition 50 in place. McGuire posted on X today in part saying public service is a noble calling regardless of party, and Congressman LaMalfa's dedication to serving the people of California deserves recognition, respect, and gratitude, end quote. McGuire also went on to say that his prayers are with LaMalfa's family, his friends, and his community.
Yeah, we know since this was so sudden and so hard on so many people, it was unexpected, but we will have to have a special election.
Right, yeah, that is by law, something that is required. Governor Gavin Newsom is expected to call that special election within 14 days. And that could take place in June, which is also the same time when the state is supposed to have a primary election. We're still waiting for judges to even decide if California's new maps under Proposition 50 are legal. But if they are upheld, experts are saying voters in the North State could be asked essentially two questions that could be complicated. The first would be, who do you want to temporarily fill LaMalfa's seat under California's current maps for the rest of the year? Those maps lean Republican. And then the other question would be, who do you want to advance the general election for the next term that starts in 2027 under the new maps that lean Democratic? A lot to unpack there. I'm not saying that's how it's going to be. I'm saying that's how many of the elections experts are expecting it to potentially be. We should get clarity within the coming days from Governor Gavin Newsom and potentially Secretary of State Shirley Weber.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And people are reacting on both sides of the aisle. Governor Gavin Newsom released a statement. Congressman Doug LaMalfa was a devoted public servant who deeply loved his country, his state, and the communities he represented. While we often approached issues from different perspectives, he fought every day for the people of California with conviction and care. He will be deeply missed.
Congressman LaMalfa's colleagues in D.C. are also remembering him. House Minority Leaders Hakeem Jeffries held a moment of silence at the start of a hearing this morning. President Donald Trump also paid tribute to him while speaking at a House Republican retreat.
I want to express our tremendous sorrow at the loss of a great member, a great member, Congressman Doug LaMalfa, who passed away yesterday, as you probably have heard. And he was the leader of the Western Caucus, a fierce champion on California water issues. He was great on water. He wanted to release the water, he'd scream at him. And a true defender of American children. He was a defender of everybody. And our hearts go out to his wife, Jill, and his entire family.
The White House and the state capitol have lowered their flags to half-staff in honor of LaMalfa.